Hi, it's Dr. Zaria Davis. I am here with Judge Fanon Rucker in his courtroom today, and thank you for joining me.
Glad to be here.
Just tell me a little bit about just your current role, what you're doing here in the courthouse as a judge.
Well, I've been a judge now for 11 years. I am on the level what's called a municipal court. And as a municipal court judge, I handle, it's called the People's Court, because we handle domestic violence and DUIs and resisting arrest and disorderly conduct and traffic cases and anything where someone is facing a year in jail or less. So we actually do vehicular homicides in here. I average about 45 or 50 cases every day, and there are 14 county judges on my level, which means that's a whole lot of people who are coming in and out of the courts. Mm-hmm. My role, as I see it, is I help to define people's perception of the court. Because of the high volume of our courts, what people see is from the courts, whether it's fair or unfair, whether they're being treated equally, whether the law is being applied across all bounds of race and gender and socioeconomic class, usually is defined by what they see in municipal court. And so I think I have a special responsibility to make sure that I'm giving to each person what they require, what they're entitled to, what the Constitution says that they're entitled to have. And so I hear trials, and I make decisions on motions, and I've actually written about 400 or 500 decisions over my 11 years. There's no other judge in the courthouse that's written more decisions, and I'm very deliberate about that. One, because there's this perception that black folks can't write, and so I wanted to dispel that myth when I became a judge. And the second piece is, a lot of times when I was practicing, I would represent someone, and they would come to court, and the judge would make a decision and say guilty or not guilty, or say the motion is granted or the motion is denied, but they wouldn't explain it. And people should not leave the courtroom confused about why the judge made a decision. So I issue these written decisions so that people can get a real clear understanding of what was believed, what wasn't believed, what law was the basis for the decision, and then they can help with their lawyer to decide whether to take it to a higher court in case they think I'm wrong, which I'm usually not. Okay. So that's what I do as a judge. I try to help guide people to different places in their lives like somebody did for me.
So what influenced you to go this direction as far as law?
Well, when I attended Hampton University, the finest, most beautiful campus in the whole universe, I was a computer science major first. And I realized after my first semester how bad I was in math. And in order to be a computer science graduate, you need to be good in math. And so I looked for a different course. My godfather was a Rastafari, and he still is, and he was a clinical psychologist. He gave me my first Bible. And so following in his path, I decided that I wanted to figure out what made people tick, how people thought, and what made them make bad decisions and good decisions. So I changed my major to psychology. I have a degree in psychology. My junior year in college, I and the rest of the world was watching the news when this guy was in a Hyundai Excel out in LA. And as he's driving in his Hyundai Excel, he wouldn't pull over with the LA police flying behind him. They finally get him out, and he was on drugs or drunk or something like that, and they beat him. They beat the mess out of him, and they stomped him with their batons and their feet. And the officers were caught on video. It was one of the first instances where the officers were caught actually doing something that the community objected to. People had been complaining about it for years, but nothing had been caught on video. So somebody across the street had a video camera, they recorded it. The officers were arrested, charged with civil rights violations and assault. They were acquitted because of some legal finagling, and we had the riots across the country. We had them in Virginia, we had them in LA, Chicago, and everywhere else. It was that incident, it was that episode in our country's history that to a 20-year-old who was trying to figure out what I was going to do in my life made me decide I want to be a lawyer. I want to be one of those folks who can help to protect people's rights, who can help to explain people's rights. And if in DC they decided that we were going to be slaves again, I want to be one of the people who could argue the Constitution as to why that shouldn't happen or couldn't happen, or to be involved in that discussion. And so that's what caused me to want to be a lawyer, was the Rodney King incident and me wanting to change the world by being involved in civil rights.
So what other types of things are you involved in here in the community? Like, I know that you're pretty active here in the greater Cincinnati area, so just share a little bit about your involvement, activities, positions you may hold outside of the courtroom.
Well, my position is and has been that a public official, there's a difference between a public official and a public servant. Public official is someone who's elected, and you see them on their jobs, and you rarely see them anywhere else. You don't see them in church, you don't see them out in the community except when they're running for office. A public servant is someone who actually serves the public, who is a community engager, who actually helps people, who actually helps to communicate and educate and enlighten about the system and how to make it better. I try to be a public servant. Mm-hmm. And so outside of the court, I'm a regular speaker at church events and historic lectures, and I do spoken word, and I'm an officer in the Masonic organization. I used to be the head of my lodge, and now I'm an officer. I've been doing that for a number of years. I'm a state officer in our Masonic organization. I'm a steward at my church. I'm an adjunct professor at the University of Cincinnati College of Law, so students are allowed to actually clerk in my courtroom and get grades for clerking in my courtroom. I used to teach a history class at the University of Cincinnati at the undergrad and graduate levels. And so now I travel and I lecture on historic events that have impacted us as Americans. Oh, goodness. I am also the president of the Season Good Government Foundation, which is about a 7-year organization. It's about 10 of us on the board, and we fund efforts by community groups and individuals to help to make the government more transparent and to get more people involved in an active government. Started by Murray and Agnes Season Good like in 1930 or 1940s. Like I said, I'm a president currently of the board for that. I speak to a lot of high school and college students. If I have an opportunity to expose some information to people that will empower them to be in a better place than they were before they heard it, then that's what I do. And I accept those invitations willingly and constantly.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about your thoughts as it relates to social justice issues and just what your involvement has been over the years.
So I'm not from Cincinnati. I'm originally from Gary, Indiana, born and raised, which a little different environment than Cincinnati. Not like Lincoln Heights, but that's another issue. Anyway, so when I got to Cincinnati, I was actually brought here as part of a recruiting effort by the University of Cincinnati College of Law. They had some issues, race issues in the city and at the college, and so UC Law specifically went to historically black colleges to recruit law students. So the 3 years I was there, I had partners they were there from Morehouse, and they got folks from Spelman and Howard and Central State and Kentucky State and Tennessee State. I mean, they actually straight up went, they said, we want black students, we're gonna go to the black colleges to get these black students. And while we were here, I knew that there were issues here because it was part of the conversation in deciding whether to come here. And so I was keenly aware and actually involved in a couple of issues in the early 90s. One was there was a young man named Fanon Crosby. Fanon Crosby was outside of McDonald's down on 6th Street. And he was, I guess, he was told to leave along. They used to have, all the buses used to stop down at 6th Street, and they told all the kids to leave, and one wouldn't leave. And a police officer shown driving down the wrong street by a news camera, jumps out of the car and goes over and just kicks him while he's, getting arrested by somebody else. And I mean, it was a big police community relations issue, and I got involved in that from behind the scenes as a law student. But I realized this is I won't say oppressive, but at the time, Cincinnati had a very locked down police state almost. And so when I went into practice, I was a prosecutor for a few years, left the prosecutor's office to go into private practice in order to practice civil rights, because it was a great place to practice civil rights. And this was before the riots, this was before the police collaborative agreement. But I also had seen as a prosecutor where there were more and more people complaining about their rights being violated, the overuse of excessive force, the use of batons, and of course deadly force before the tasers got in. So when I was in private practice, I was actually representing people who were the victims on these cases. I was actually the one holding press conferences and on the radio and doing TV talking about these issues. And so the lawsuits that I was involved in was not necessarily intended to get money for these folks. Certainly that was part of it. But the major piece was, how can we use these lawsuits to help people recognize that there's a better way to do this, and then help to change the system to make it better. And so it was the culmination of why I said I wanted to go to law school. I wanted to go to law school so I could help to protect people's rights and help make change. And here I was, literally at 26 years old, doing just that, going to federal court, filing class action lawsuits, and being involved in national conversations. I had a case where a young boy was handcuffed, 5 years old, and it ended up on Good Morning America, and we got a good settlement out the city, but more than that, we changed the policy of how they assign police officers to police officers. I represented the black firefighters, and as a result of a class action lawsuit we filed against the union, we were able to integrate the firehouses in Cincinnati and establish a permanent position for an African-American firefighter on the board for Local 48. I mean, it was purposeful and it was intentional. And what I want to say is that I hope, because the intention was to build blocks, to make changes, to make things better. How do you measure it? You never do. It's hard to, but I know that I was happy with the outcomes in a lot of those cases, and it's been a little difficult as a judge because obviously I'm not filing lawsuits anymore, and I don't see a lot of people who look like us who are stepping into those roles in order to continue doing civil rights work, and it's still out here. There's still need for change, and so that's why I do it from my position as a judge in the ways that I can. One of the things that you mentioned earlier, what kind of things I'm involved in my role as a member of the order, and also as a member of the NAACP, I drafted a plan to help bring our black organizations back to a position of being the clearinghouse for information about candidates and campaigns. So about 5 years ago, I approached some folks and they approached me, and we have now been doing a collaborative, very in-depth campaign forum twice a year that have drawn 300-400 people at a time. We get full color photos and background information on the candidates. The forums have attracted Republicans, Democrats, Green Party folks, and it's the Masons, and now the Alphas are involved, as well as the Prince Hall Masons, and the goal is to get the Urban League and some churches and also the other fraternities and sororities, so that the community can once again have faith that these are the organizations and the institutions that they can rely on to get them the information they need to engage in order to make decisions to exercise their power like they're supposed to. So on the idea of social justice, it's hard for me sometimes because I see folks marching, I see people protesting, I see people objecting, and at 47 years old, I don't have the energy to do that. And as a judge, I can't necessarily do that, and I have some ways that I think they can do it and maybe do it better. But I'm not going to criticize somebody for how they decide they want to fight for it. I'm just going to say, well, here's another way that we can do it, but we're all trying to reach the same destination.
So we have known each other for quite a while.
A couple years.
Yeah, just 25 years to
That's
be
right.
exact.
That's right.
And I know you grew up in this hip hop culture. So how do you integrate that into your current profession? How does that look?
Well, let's see. I was a fiend before I became a teen. I melted microphones instead of cones and ice cream, music orientated, so hip hop is a rich. I mean, I love hip hop. I'm an encyclopedia when it comes to hip hop, and but hip hop is not just words. Hip hop is a mentality. Hip hop is a cultural phenomenon, and so when I'm on the bench, that's just part of it. Now, I have never given a decision in prose. I haven't said, I think that you're guilty, but I'm not filthy. I haven't done anything like that. Right. But I do say that everything about my growing up and everything about the imagery and everything about my experiences, that's part of what hip hop is. When did you fall in love with hip hop? I mean, those things then color how I deal with people who are in front of me and how I deal with the prosecutors who, goodness gracious. So sometimes I have people in my courtroom who are in charge of prosecuting people who did not grow up in hip-hop era, who do not quite understand the people when they come in front of them, or the people's experiences, and so they have a puzzled look. So I look at my role sometimes as a hip-hop educator. Okay. So like when there was a young man in front of me who possessed, and he was drunk off of Red Bull. And the prosecutor was like, well, Judge, I'm going to dismiss that because last time I heard Red Bull is an energy drink. And I had to explain to her that, there's Red Bull, the energy drink in the blue and red bottle, but then there's Red Bull in the 40 ounce with the Red Bull on it, and then Blue Bull. So Blue Bull makes you sleep, Red Bull makes you fight. And so once I explained that to her, that's part of, a different culture. Right. She kept the charge, but we had a laugh about that. Mm-hmm. But so everything about how I engage in my courtroom, whether it's the lawyer that's been practicing for 70 years who doesn't have any meaningful relationships with that part of society, or whether it's the 20-something lawyers who come in here who that's all they know, white or black, that's what they appreciate and respect because that was the energy that they grew up in. Mm-hmm. That's how I interact. And I think that based on what I hear from the judges and the police officers and the other judges, I think that they appreciate it and respect it.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me today and allowing us into your courtroom.
Of course.
And I'll probably be back to just check this out. I've never actually been in a courtroom where I've had an opportunity to witness court in session. So.
No boring days in here.
No boring days. Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.